I'm going to go ahead and call to order the June 10th Budget Committee meeting at 6 p.m. In our packets, there's an agenda, but I'd like you to know that there's a change to the agenda. After call to order, there's a welcome, and at that time, we have a statement to be read. As this statement is being read, I ask that we listen appropriately, appreciatively, and thoughtfully as community, families, and members.
I would like to take a moment to thank Jackie Olson for all of her expertise and help over the past few weeks. She has worked really hard in helping this district out. She has been professional in her approach, and I appreciate that. I would also like to thank the Budget Committee for the obvious reasons this budget season has not been a normal one. The hours and the extra meetings that you have engaged in are appreciated, and thank you. Within next year's budget, there are some hard realities and therefore some tough decisions to make. It will take a lot of work and time, whomever is working on these tough decisions. Whatever the makeup is of that team, whether it be about class sizes, staff allocations, or building budgets, I ask the Newburgh-Dundee community to show a little grace towards them as they work through this process. This will not be an enjoyable one for anyone. There are no right answers. Between the state's underfunding and our mismanagement, we have a serious problem on our hands. Negativity, name-calling, social media campaigns filled with lies and half-truths will not ease the burden or solve the problem. I would have hoped that this community would have learned that when the us versus them approach to all things Newburgh's occurs, no one wins. It has been years since civility and assuming good intent was the norm. I hope that building this new budget is the start of truly working together for our kids. Thank you. Respectfully submitted, Dr. Stephen Phillips.
Thank you. We're going to go ahead and move on to approval of May 21st and 28th minutes. First, let's go ahead and start with May 21st minutes.
I move that the Newburgh School Board Budget Committee accept the minutes as presented.
I second it.
There's been a motion that's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye or hands.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining. Let's go ahead and look at May 28th minutes, please. And at this time for the May 28th minutes, I'd like to add an addition to the minutes. As per the minutes and per law, I'd like to add the statement that Dr. Phillips read at the last meeting. If there are no other additions, deletions, corrections, And when you're ready for a motion.
I move to adopt the minutes with the amendment.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Yeah, just clarification. Is this ADMW part of what you're adding, or is it just the? Perfect.
Just the Phillips
Thank
statement
you.
that went around.
Another question, the list of names, is that included in the minutes?
Can you clarify that, say that question again? Oh, that is included in the minutes as that was part of, yes. So included in the minutes will be the minutes from May 28th. And it should be the Newburgh School District Budget Committee, what it needs list was part of that meeting. And then also the statement from Dr. Phillips.
Thank you.
Any other questions or discussions?
I would like to make sure that all those components are posted on the web so the community can see all of it. Thank you, staff.
So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining. Motion pass. It was going earlier. Okay, thank you. Can you go to slide 3, please? Thank you. Tonight's goal. This committee has one goal tonight. That goal is to pass the 2024-25 school year budget and tax rates. We're going to go ahead and review the process. There are 3 parts to this process. We are at the present process where we have gathered the necessary information for the required approval of the budget. The 2 other parts of the process are to come, the inquiry and the necessary budget adjustments. Okay. Again, the why it needs to be passed tonight is due to state regulations for districts that we are required to approve it by June 30th. If we do not approve this and the board does not adopt it by June 30th, then we will not have met our deadline, which means our permission for spending is not granted effective July 1st. At this time, we're going to go ahead and move to public comments. I'd like to remind those that are in the public comments that you're invited to speak. If you're speaking for an organization, then you need to tell us the organization's name. Or if you're speaking as an individual, your name and the city that you live in. Okay. Speakers may offer objective criticism of district operations and program. The budget shall not hear, or the budget committee shall not hear comments regarding individual district staff members. Okay. If I need to direct a visitor to go ahead and review the policy about our complaint process, it is KL, public complaints for board, if you need to consider that. We have 2 comments, and I just want to clarify, we only have 2, correct? Okay, our first comment is from Autumn Foster. I would like to remind you that 3 minutes for comments. Give me 1 second to bring up my timer. I apologize.
My name is Autumn Foster of Newburgh, Oregon. I am a Newburgh High School parent, voter, taxpayer, and public school supporter. I'm here today to express my disappointment with the current budget situation and how it is being managed. I'm a former school communications director. I worked for this district in that role during the last budget crisis. I was riffed. One of the things that we did, however, was we were very transparent with how everything was going to happen. We had listening sessions, we put things on our website. We were very clear about what happened and how it was being managed. I wrote a press release announcing that I was riffed. That really sucked. It was a heartbreaking process. We know that this is a heartbreaking process. But what we are not getting is communication from this district. We are not getting any transparency. We have no idea why this happened, how it happened. You want to talk about why rumors go wild on social media? There's one way to fix it. You put out information and we have the facts. And then there's no need for anyone to speculate about anything. It is absolutely crazy to me that we have not heard anything from the district other than something from the superintendent who can't be bothered to show up.
I'm going to pause right there for using a direct.
I
staff
didn't say his
member.
name.
You're right, but you are reflecting on an individual district staff member.
Okay,
Thank you.
please forgive me.
That's right. Thank you.
Am I done? I can't talk anymore?
You still have 1 minute.
I encourage you to not riff the communications director. That is something we need in this district. No one else has the capability to communicate with us. And you want me to do work to help support a bond and pass a bond again like I did last time? You have to start being transparent with us. Thank you.
Our next public comment, please forgive me if I do not pronounce this right. Delana Rush. Did I pronounce that correct? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Delana Rush. I live in Dundee, Oregon. I am a junior in high school this year. I'm going to talk about life skills and how the budget was put on them, even though it was not. The life skills struggle so much that they have to hire students who aren't qualified to work with life skills. They don't have training for us. We don't have access to their IUPs. And don't get me wrong, it is an absolute pleasure to work with these kids. And sorry. But the fact that the school has to hire students is nuts to me. We have no training. We don't know what sets these kids off. I mean, I was almost put in a dangerous situation because I was left alone with a student and I did not know how to help him. And if this budget really did go to the life skills, why do teachers, the staff members, have to pay with their own money to support these kids? These kids bring in 3 times as more money than atypical kids. So you say this budget goes to life skills and transportation. Now transportation I get, but life skills is, I don't get it. Like, where did that go? Because these kids struggle so much and so does the staff, and you're taking away staffing that they need. And I've grown really close with one of the staff members, and seeing her go is awful because she became one of my really close friends. Sorry. But yeah, it's really heartbreaking because these kids, I was really depressed for a long time, and getting to work with these kids brought so much joy to me that they became the reason why I got up every day. And I may not work with these kids anymore, but I still see them and they still recognize me and come up to me in class and hug me and make me laugh every day. And the fact that you can put this on these kids and say that they are the reason why we have no budget is insane to me, because they don't deserve that. If anything, they need more. They need more help. Sorry. It's not okay to me. And when I was told that the budget was put on these kids and that it's their fault that we don't have the money for them hurts, because these kids are an absolute joy. And if you spend at least one day with them, it's incredible that they are so smart, but yet they get treated like crap every day. It's insane. I mean, kids at our school are so mean to them, and it's awful. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you for the public comment. I'm gonna try it again. Oh, there we go. We have a budget update now from Jackie Olson, who is Oregon Association of School Board or of School Business Officials. And I do want to clarify that it is Oregon's Association of School Business Officials and not from ODE or the state.
Well, hello again, everybody here, all right? So, okay. I have been working, pretty diligently over the last week to week and a half on revising your budget. So, just a couple of things before we get started. I know I sent you probably more information than you wanted, to see, but there were so many changes. It was not easy to identify where those changes were on one page or not, because it impacted the entire budget. So that's why you got a revised shortened version, but you did get a lot of information. This budget does compare the original proposed budget that you got at the first meeting to what I've done now. There was a version that started getting adjusted in between, but when I tried to start aligning everything, it got way confusing on what we were talking about and which number we were making the adjustment off of. And so when you look at the budget, the 24-25 proposed was the initial budget you received. And then I made a new column that says proposed 3, because there was already a proposed 2 in the system. And so the proposed 3 really is the column that is what I am recommending at this time. I'd like to remind everybody that a budget is a plan. It is a 4-letter word and it is plan. There's lots of other things that people like to call a budget. It's a great tool to have, but it is just an estimate at a point in time, and the budget will change multiple times throughout the year. The entire thing is built on estimates of what we know at that point in time, and so this is an estimate. It will always be an estimate. The important part is how you monitor it and review it throughout the year to make sure that your revenue and expenditures are aligning with your budget, or if there's a change, that we're making sure that we're discussing that ahead of time or when those occurrences happen. This proposed budget has also been reviewed by 2 other business officials. I think it's always important when usually when budget development, we have months, we work with our administrators, we work through community, we work through a number of different factors in order to create a document. And I put this together in a little over a week. And so I know that there are errors in here. And so when we talked to people about reviewing, where do we think that we're close? Yes, here's the things that we all look at. We all agreed that we came up with about the same revenue. And so that makes me feel good. And going forward, there's going to be changes. This is not anything set in stone. The proposed budget also has recommendations on how I would balance the budget. What I'd like to say is none of these things that I changed in this document has been reviewed or approved by the board or administrators. This is a draft right now. There's going to be a whole process to go through afterwards. And so I want to make sure that we're talking and discussing budget authority. I have not provided a list to the district at this time of all the individual positions cut, because those are going to be discussed and those are decisions that need to be made. I made choices on my best guess and I hit every single category I possibly could. There may be budgets that don't get cut and there might be others that get cut more. Those aren't my decisions to make. I'm providing you a budget that balances revenue and expenditures. And so I want you to think about that as we go through talking about the major changes. And so with that, I'm going to hit on a few highlights. I'd like to talk about a lot of the time I'd like to talk about to start with is general fund revenue. And let's see. There we go. All right. So on page 2 of your document, you're going to see it's page 2. Actually numbered, you're going to see the revenue. So the original 24-25 budget has you had a proposed general fund revenue of over $68 million. Your new proposed 3 column has a proposed budget of 56,526 for a difference of 12,214,000. So my initial estimate was closer to 14 million, and through the budget process and identifying and making sure that we had all of the revenue budgeted and where our expenditures were, it was a little bit less. So that's a good thing, right? It's not as much of a cut, but I want to make sure that you are aware of that. Next slide, please. I've received a couple of emails and want to make sure that we're really clear on why was there a decrease in revenue. So there are 3 main areas that had that changed. The first was on the beginning fund balance. So if you're still on page 2, you will see 5,400. It's just a couple lines up from the bottom. The original budget number showed oops, and I put a wrong number in there. I am so sorry, and this is what I get for rushing through a presentation. I've put all other sources. The beginning fund balance should actually show on there 8,120,907. The new budget column shows on that same line 0. So one of the things that I'm still working with, I have been projecting your beginning fund, ending fund balance. Started at about a negative 3.7. We're down again today when I reviewed it to about a negative 1.7. We're still working on ways to decrease that to get it to 0. I've been in contact with the auditors on potential solutions to that. I do want to clarify, a couple of weeks ago when I was at a meeting, I did say that the district is not receiving a short-term tax anticipation note or a short-term loan, they're called a TAN. And so there is no revenue of beginning fund balance of that or debt service that would pay that money back in next year's budget. So you are not receiving a loan at this point. The reason we had talked about that is that your cash, you have cash in the bank, it's just not in the general fund. And so this is where we talked about cash versus fund balance. And because you still would have cash in the bank before your taxes come in November, you didn't qualify for a loan. It's really you're right on the line, but at this point you did not qualify. So that loan was not built into this budget. And we're still working to get your beginning fund balance at 0 for next year. I did not put it as a negative because I'm not sure. Our goal is 0. And I hate to say our goal is 0 because we never want a 0 beginning fund balance, but that's really where you are right now. The other thing in here is property taxes. So when we talk about property taxes, we talk about the current year property taxes, the prior year property taxes, and then your payments in lieu of other property taxes. So those are the top 3 lines on page 2 that add up. So the original proposed budget shows 23 million and the new is over 20 million. And then state school fund, the district has consistently deposited the high cost disability funds along with the state school fund dollars into the one budget line. And so I did not change that for consistency purposes. And so I put on there that was the SSF and the high cost disability, but there was a decrease in that as well. Are there questions about revenue?
Yes. Can you say that last sentence over again? The
So-
SSS and high cost disability.
So the 3101 on your page 2 that shows SSF, the general support it shows. That is a combination of the state school fund monthly payments along with the high cost disability. Other districts also may include small high school correction or small high school or remote elementary, but those are all on the same line. And I just wanted you to know that that's where both of those revenues were. So when you look at an estimate for the state school fund, it isn't going to match exactly that because you also have to add in the high cost disability, which is not information that you guys get on a regular basis. Okay. Other questions on revenue before we go on? All right. Some of the questions I got really focused on this, some of the state school funds. So I'm going to do just a little bit of sidetrack and education on the state school fund and how we got to that number, because I think it's really important to understand for this board, budget committee, and community on where the numbers come from. There's 4 areas that are really the big areas in the formula revenue. It is a formula. It is designed to be equitable across the state. So it doesn't matter if you attend Newburgh or Philomath or Portland Public, every student gets the same amount, whether that amount comes from the state or from your local property taxes, it all balances out. So we don't have one district that gets $20,000 and one that gets $5,000. Every student gets the same amount of money, but how that money comes to the district and the formula that is used is very different between between every district. Every district has a little bit different ratio in there. Go ahead and the next. So the first piece that I want to touch on is the extended ADMW. And so we have ADMR, ADMW, and then extended ADMW. So those are average daily membership residents. So when we say ADMR, those are our student counts. That is actual heads in the classroom. I can only be one head. You can be one head. We all count as one. That's ADMR. ADMW are all of the other factors that you might get additional funding or weights for. So ESL, pregnant and parenting, IEPs, those are examples that you can get additional weights per student. The extended ADMW allows the district to get paid on whether the ADMW is higher this year or from the prior year. So we're always looking at enrollment or the ADMW between the 2 years to say, and we get paid off of the higher of the 2. So for next year's budget, we are projecting that you are being paid off of this year's ADMW, which is 4,700.74.
So I just want to clarify on that 4,700, that's a projection for this year because the year is not complete. And so is that been trued up with our actual number of students and weightings? Are we looking at what we have now rather than what was projected a long time ago?
This has been updated and revised. They've pulled in the second period ADM, and ODE has the projections. And on the next slide and on each of your in your paper that I gave you the this came out on the 5th. That was last week. It was one of the days. I don't know which day, but this is the latest estimate from ODE. So you can see the 24-25 compared to my slide. I had a little bit different number based on information I have. This is what ODE has right now. So this is part of one of those things that when we get down to looking at and how do we monitor this, this is something that we look at every time we submit our ADM, and every time ODE puts out an estimate, we should be looking at the extended ADMW and where we think we are actually this year to make sure that things are aligning. So what does that mean to you? It means that next year might be your higher of the 2, might be using, I should say the following year. So you're declining in ADMW potentially by 125 weights between each fiscal year. That means less funding every single year. So this isn't a decrease that we're looking at for 1 year. This is every year we're looking at where are we at and how do we adjust our budget to make sure that we are spending money based on the revenue we receive, based on the students that we have. It's an important thing to look at, and it's always hard to say, how do we know what we're using? Because the extended ADMW is the higher of the 2. So just clarifying that. Any questions on extended ADMW? Okay. I think this just showed the summary of that page. You can keep going. Thank you. The next is local revenue. So local revenue includes property taxes, the common school fund, and the county school fund. Your property taxes are collected from 3 different counties. They are estimated because we receive a notice from the county that says, here's what you should, what you should get if you collected 100%. And we know that no district in any county has ever received 100% of their property taxes because there are people that don't pay. That's where the prior year taxes come in. And you could get those. I used to get payments from the 80s. And so it could take a number of years and you get cents on those. So you figure out your district's collection rate, and that is what we budgeted. So it's, even though the county says you should be getting X, we never get that number. It is how taxes come in when people pay them, whether it's November, December, or 5 years from now. You will get the money, but when it comes in can vary greatly. So it's important to know that information.
A question on that?
Yes.
So in the calculation with the state school fund, it would only be based on the actual property taxes we get in that affect that, not.
Correct.
Okay.
So that's part of the process that when we do reports, we report our actual collections, and that's how they balance the state school fund. So if you got less property taxes, you would get more state school fund dollars. And if all of a sudden you got a lot more property taxes, you would get less state school fund dollars. So you always get the same amount of money per student. Great question. All right, so the next sheet that I printed and gave to you guys, and this is where I say that these are estimates, and I look at them every time they come out because I already have an error between the budget and this. So I knew that the state was making an update on this, and I went in and I adjusted all of the numbers to what we had agreed on that we thought it was going to happen. And if you look at your local property taxes on this sheet, it shows 20,645,716. That matches exactly your current year property taxes. Great job, Jackie. Well, great job, Jackie only went to line 1. I didn't add lines 2 and 3 in there. And so I need to go back and make an adjustment on this so that I'm including all of your property taxes. But when that happens, that means your state school fund is going to be adjusted next time. So one of the things that I look at is what changes between each estimate. That is something that I notice, like, okay, this doesn't align. That's an error that happens. It's data entry, but we can fix it. It will be corrected during the next estimate. And that's how you should be operating with making adjustments for your throughout the year as something else is known, as your student enrollment changes, as your transportation changes, whatever happens. If you ask ODE to open the collections, we're able to make those adjustments, which means that you get the payments for students during that fiscal year as much as possible versus the next year in the adjustment.
So I want to clarify that even though this local property taxes is needs to be a higher number, the state school fund grant, which is that's not shown on the screen, is picking up the difference. And so really our overall revenue is still correct. It's just between the 2 categories
Correct.
that need to be changed. Thank you.
So this is the sheet that I look at all the time. It lists what our transportation is going to be. It tells you your collection rate. So this district is at 70% reimbursement rate. That means for every eligible transportation dollar, because there's ineligible expenses, you get reimbursed 70% of that. There's districts that get either an 80% or 90% as well. The extended ADMW, it tells you right there in the middle of the page what your 24-25 number is, what the 23-24, and then what your extended ADMW. So it shows you right there like, oh, I know based on this that I'm using for next year, I'm using this year's extended ADMW.
Can I ask a quick question in regards to the transportation, 70, 80, 90? How
Yep.
is it determined?
There's a formula with the number of students versus the number of miles, and I haven't looked at it in a number of years.
So ODE, really, it's to support smaller rural districts that have to drive a lot of miles. Think of far east Oregon where they're picking up 5 students and going 150 miles, right? So it's really to recognize that a really small district that has lots of miles needs more reimbursement than we're within, 10 miles of the school. It's a difference in terms of cost that's needed or reimbursement that's needed.
Thank you.
The formula revenue, this takes you all the way through. The number that should match your state school fund payment, which is that 3101, is the 31,697,636, which is in the 1, 2, 3, 4, like the 5th box down.
Can I ask, is there the bottom part of this page on the next slide so that the community can see what we're talking about?
I did not add the
Okay.
bottom slide on there. I
That's
only
all
did
right.
the top slide,
That's
sorry.
right. Thank you.
And this is why I said that that number will not match, because the high cost disability is also included in there, and that is not anywhere on this sheet. It is just other information that we are aware of. Questions on the state school fund local revenue?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
I guess I'm curious, so the 4,700 will be our number because we can take last year or this year.
Yep,
And so we already know the total amount that we will get next year from revenue between property taxes and state school fund.
we know close to what it's gonna be.
Okay. But so at the end of the year, if there was a change, it would be based on our property taxes from the state.
It's gonna be based on all the factors that go into
Transportation,
and teacher experience, all of your ADMW, how every other district is doing in their collections and what's going on in their districts between declining enrollment, because if we all drop, we get a little bit more per student, we get a little bit more. So it's an estimate, and this is why it's important when these estimates come out that we look to see what changed and can we identify, was there something within your district that changed that we gave the state information, or are we doing everything that we know is right? We're right on track, and somebody else, because you're a fairly small district in the big scheme of things. If you look at the 10K, so all the districts that have more than 10,000 students, if there's some major changes between those districts, it impacts the entire state. And so we really are watching this to say, this is the best information that we have in making our estimates and building our budget, but it's just an estimate. And we have to try to track what's happening statewide and making sure that if a major change happens, we reach out and ask what happened and why, so that we can communicate that.
So
you.
one thing that I would draw the budget committee's attention to is under the 20, it's the second skinny box down, 24-25 general purpose grant, and you'll see a number that says funding ratio in front of it, 2.337210623488. Okay, that is how the state balances the whole $10.1 billion state school fund for the whole state by changing that number up and down. So that's how you can tell if when you're looking at that. So for instance, if you look at this year, you will see towards the end of the year that number went up for the whole state, right? But for Newburgh, we had to give money back because we had been overpaid with our property taxes being too low. We got paid estimated then, because this is really important. It's something the community's been asking us over and over again. And so then the state school fund revenue from the state was increased to offset the lower property taxes. But then that was an estimate on the property tax. So then the actuals came in. And so when you add the actual property taxes plus the higher number from state school fund, we got overpaid for this current year and part of last year. So then that's why they took a deduction from our state school fund payment in May. And so I just wanted to kind of get that out there because it's been a conversation in many venues that There's many tweaks in this formula that changes the numbers, but for us in Newburgh, the biggest portion of why we got money taken back is because we weren't truing up our state school fund numbers with the state. And that's why we've made that recommendation that truing up happens on a regular basis throughout the year so we don't get overpaid. Thank you.
I get, oh, no, you.
Okay, well, so my question, you might have just answered this, the truing up. This document comes to,
So that's posted out on the ODE website where we sent an email when it is updated and there's a new one out there, but it is open to anybody in the public can go see every single payment for every single district.
and how often do these get updated?
Great question. It depends on the need, is what I'm going to say. If there's major changes that are happening in enough districts that submit changes, they may recalculate. I expect since we got one just this last week, that we won't see one again probably until the fall after school starts and people then start truing up their enrollment to say how many students really showed up. We projected 25 and we had 50. You know, we need to go tell ODE that information. And usually by November, they have recalculated. Sometimes there's more reasons to calculate and other times it's fairly stable and we don't get as many. So it's never a set date or time that they have to do it.
But this is a tool for business officers to sort of keep abreast of the health of the budget. Is that a fair
I
assessment?
would add to that it is also, there should be superintendent oversight with the business manager working together. So it's not just one person looking at the numbers. It's really, to make it stronger, you should have multiple people in the district looking at the numbers together. And that oversight is the superintendent role.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate both of your input.
I would also add, like, as our enrollment changes, you know, throughout the year, that's going to directly affect this number as well. If we lose any students, if we gain any students mid-year, that's going to change the target again. So having that kind of regular check-ins is definitely going to help.
So the change in students here would affect the way that the overall state school fund budget is, but we will still be on track budgeted with our 4,700 number because we can.
We are on track with the 4,700 because the 4,592, I don't expect your weights to go up that much next year. And I could be completely wrong, but if it is, the state will adjust it during the next time they recalculate. They'll pick the higher of the two without us having to tell them that. So as long as you're reporting information correctly and in a timely manner, ODE pulls that in and makes that adjustment, and they automatically will give you the higher of the two. And if you've been paid lower and all of a sudden, you know, those extra 300 kids come in, then you get paid for all of those for that time that they were there. So you might get money late. Doesn't mean that it only starts once they recalculate. It is for that entire year.
I guess I just want to clarify though. So if our number goes lower, we're not going to be hit with a charge because we're doing the extended.
You will not on the weights for this ADMW, correct. You will have an adjustment still for the local property taxes because those are not finalized until the audits are finalized and submitted at the end of December for next year. And then the true for that will come next May.
Thank you.
Is everybody good on where our revenue is? We went over the big changes. There's other little changes in there, but I'm highlighting the major changes in the budgets. Okay.
I do have a quick question about the extended ADMW.
Okay.
Do we have any historical information to say over, say, the last few years, what that number's been doing, if it's been going up or down? Because right now we're looking at the higher of the two, but next year, when we're looking at it, if our number's been trending down, that's going to hurt us in the next budget cycle as well, because then our extended ADMW is now going to be at the 45.
statewide enrollment is going down. And so I would anticipate, based on your trends of the last couple of years of enrollment decreasing, that you will be in declining enrollment. At some point, it will probably flatten out, or it might fluctuate a little bit. I think right now we're seeing some of those bigger adjustments that are happening. And
So
you're
I'm-
right, we have 2 years to catch up. So when, like, for right now, or for next year, you're going to be paid off of 23, 24, but you know what your number is for 24, 25 or close to it. So when we're building budgets for next year, you're already planning to make those additional reductions so that your revenue and expenditures will match.
I did go back and look at 3 years because I was looking to see what the trend was, and are in declining enrollment in each of those 3 years. So it is a trend for us in this declining enrollment. We've been doing the extended ADMW for the last 3. And one thing to remember also is we're not, in 24, 25, we will still get our final payment for 23, 24 and or money taken back depending on what the case is. So we're quite often looking at 3 years at once to try, because they as they close them out and you're then budgeting for the next budget year, there's quite often a district has to really closely track 3 years in order to get accurate state school fund numbers.
I forgot that I did a late ad for you guys, this last sheet. This is the estimates for 23, 24, not all of them, but I put some of them on here for you. And these are the trends that I track. So I take that sheet that we have, and I have an Excel sheet that I plop in all the information every time an estimate comes out, and I look to see what changed. So I'd like to highlight the difference that happened between December and the March. And the property taxes estimate went from 18.8 to 22.78. It's a $4 million increase in your local property taxes. And as soon as you make that, what do you say? If I get more property taxes, what happens? Less state school fund. So your state school fund money went down. And so you got less money this year based on these estimates. I then have an ongoing year-to-date projection about where I think I'm going to end up for the year. What am I projecting? Where is my transportation? I take the number so you can see like that funding ratio that's right in the middle, the 2 point blah, 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 blah that changes. I use that in my projected every time it changes, but you can see these are where what happens. Based on that, if I was to pick today as my point in time, you should have received $31,956,000 from the state school fund. You only received $29,227,000, which means that you were shorted $2.7 million. I did not budget that $2.7 million that may come next May in 2025. We're not even done with this fiscal year yet. This gives me an idea though that you're going to get a positive payment, which is great. But depending what all the other school districts across the state and ESDs submit as their actuals, this number could go up or down big time. And so it's really important to know, where do I think that we're projecting? Because if this was negative, I would have given you a different budget to say, even though everything that happened, we may have to pay back more money next May. Right now, I'm projecting a positive dollar in there. What that amount is I don't know. This might be a way for us to help get your beginning fund balance to 0 as well. So I'm working with the auditors on that. But at this time, that amount is not budgeted because it's not known. It's just an estimate that may happen, and we'll know more as we go into the finalizing audits and as information comes in across the state on what the actual enrollment is, and all of those other pieces that play into there.
Under the local revenue on that page, you have property taxes like a 328.22.780. But then at the year to date and projected, it's lower at the end there.
Because those are the estimates. So for all of these are estimates that what got put in. And this is what we're actually received. So we told the state that we were going to receive $22 million. We only received what I'm projecting to be 20 million.
Thank you.
this is something that I would recommend that you have something like this in future, that you look at least a couple times a year. I like to have it in January as part of our, we use it as discussions when I'm building budgets to say, where are we at right now? Where's our revenue? What are we projecting? Are we on track this year? Because if we're not on track this year, we have to make adjustments, and that helps us develop budgets and going forward. And it's a great tool to look at to make sure I'm on track for what I hope is happening. And if we have a $4 million increase, I would hope that one of you would say, hey, Jackie, there's a $4 million increase on here. Tell me why you increased that number by that amount. Because we usually see property taxes go up like an average 4%. Some districts have a higher rate, some are lower. Every county is a little bit different, but a 4% increase in property taxes annually is a pretty good estimate.
I have one question. There's really nothing about the pages. You mentioned an audit several times tonight. Can you explain what's happening or what that's doing right now? Is that just for you to get up to speed on everything, or is that actually like an additional audit past what you're doing?
So I was talking about the annual financial audit that happens by your audit firm that you hire to come in. I'm sorry.
Gotcha. Okay. No, that's the
I
thing.
just did a financial analysis for you is what I'm
Okay.
going to say. And then I built your budget, revised your budget, but the auditors will come in and go through a whole series and give you that whole audit book at the end of December.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on? All right, so we are on to expenditure. So again, I'm highlighting the difference, and I show this because it should match our revenue. So if I would have expenditures with an amount that didn't match my revenue, we have a problem. And so that's always step number one. In our expenditures, I always think it's important to remember that your contingency and unappropriated, even though they're amounts that may not be spent, are budgeted as an expenditure. Based on the decision, the board action last week, the unappropriated ending fund balance has been entered as 0 in this proposed budget. Your revised contingency amount is 1.4, which ends up being about 2.48% of your overall budget. That's how it worked out. That's what it is budgeted at. It's higher than 2%, but it's not your entire contingency and unappropriated previous policy amount of 7%. So I just want to make it clear that I zeroed the unappropriated out based on your guys's decision last week, the boards, and so that is not a budgeted amount in here. In a previous presentation I did to you guys, I talked about the percentage of salaries and benefits that are part of your budget. And this shows, I know it's really small and we can post this presentation, give it to you guys later. The salaries and benefits are 78.96% of the budget. And so when we talk about reductions, there isn't a lot of places to make reductions. Your contracted services, which is the next biggest line item on there, are your substitutes and your utilities. And you can't not pay your utilities. We have to have power in the buildings, right? And you have to have substitutes. And in this year's budget in 23-24, that was one of the areas that exceeded the budget amount in many categories was substitutes. And so the substitutes have been increased. We do know that that is an ongoing expense, and the amount of substitutes has continued to increase on an annual basis. The other categories, when we talk about supplies, that's the line right above. That's the third line up. So that is your supplies. That's your toilet paper. That's your pencils. That's all the stuff for the classroom. There's not a lot of money to cut in there. So as we've had to reduce the budget by over $12 million, I couldn't necessarily cut supplies. I can't cut insurance. You have to have it, and which really brings us down to it had to be staffing in different areas of the budget.
What is a general recommended percent of a school district's budget for salary or personnel?
It varies. I've seen it as high as like 86, 87%. I've also seen it down in that 75. I think it really depends on the other funds that the districts have available. There's local option levies. There's other funding ratios that districts have, and staffing may not always be part of it. You may also see that they have more contracted services because they could be contracted out for, I should have said contracted services also includes transportation, but transportation, food service, custodial. You could have more contracted services for your OTs, your PTs, your SLPs, which would reduce your salaries and benefits. So that is part of the game of always knowing what you pay as a district, and that amount will vary. So in reviewing the budget, there are things that I had to increase in order to know that we were going to meet, not exceed budget levels next year. So one of the areas that that is concerning is just the overall unemployment rate. I anticipate the district's rate increasing with the layoffs that are going to be happening, changes to some of the classified staff who are able to apply for unemployment benefits. And so I increase the unemployment rate in your budget, which expenses more to pay for those claims that come in. I increased legal fees. I increased utilities based on your current projections and trends. Transportation was an area that the Budget Committee has talked about before. That was also increased to meet the current contract. Some adjustments were projected and put in there based on the number of school days or whatever you may do. There might be condensing routes, any ways to save money. And so it wasn't the full contracted amount, but transportation definitely increased. The FTE that was added back into the general fund was a 0.7 total FTE move from food service into the general fund. That was talked about before. One of the areas and ways that we discussed transitioning potentially staff back from the general fund into food service in the future is to really track time to say, what are we doing? Who's doing the work? Is it really a 1%, 2%, or 10%, 20%, 50%? There could be additional staff needed to support the food service program, but having data to back that up will be really important to make that transition in the future. All right, so then we get to after we balance the revenue and I went through and increased areas of the budget, then we get to what are the reductions. Really, this came down to staffing. The staffing reductions reduced about 60 FTE within the general fund. There were staff that I moved from the general fund into special revenue accounts as I could. So there may have been reductions, for example, in SIA and other categories in order to move staff in there. But overall, you're looking at probably reducing FTE, and I said FTE, not actual people, by over 60. I also budgeted 10 furlough days. I'd like to highlight the furlough days. So I budgeted furlough days because if I didn't, it was additional staffing that had to be reduced. I do think it's important to recognize, though, that furlough days are one-time savings. Those are not the next year, those days would be added back. And so it doesn't necessarily reduce your budget in moving forward. It could be that you decide on no furlough days next year and you do more staff reductions, or you could do less staff reductions and more furlough days. This is the balance that I used. Again, this was at my discretion, just trying to get some numbers out there to give the board the authority to move forward with the changes that need to happen for next fiscal year. When we look at the furlough days, if I used the average one furlough day for only staffing costs, that doesn't include any other costs across the district that we may save in electricity for not having the lights on or most of the lights on for a day, or savings for transportation for a day or food service. It's about $210,000 is what one furlough day saves you in staffing costs only. So that gives you an idea to move forward. If you decide to do this in a different way, you at least have a number. With the staffing reductions, I also tried to, when I was looking at groups of staff members. I also looked at reducing the person with the least experience because usually that's how a roofing process works. And so this budget still maintains those staff that have been here for a number of years, that have seniority. They may have longevity stipends because the way that you roof people normally is that the lowest person on the totem pole, the last person hired, based on their credentials and what you need for licensing for those positions, those are the people that end up getting laid off first. And so if any of the staffing were to change, that $210,000 ratio could change as well.
For that furlough day amount, that's based on the number it would be after the 60 FTE come off. Thank you.
So if you wanted to add a day back, if you said you only wanted 9 days, you would have approximately $210,000 in staffing to reduce again, which is multiple positions. And so that's where the staffing happened across all programs. It happened across every category. I am not providing that list. I don't feel comfortable talking about individual positions because I just went through and made reductions in order to balance this budget. The district has to go through all of the records, make those decisions, and work with the board on what those actions actually are. And so I just don't want to make sure that we're not talking individual positions at this time. Any questions in the general fund? And this is why you got multiple pages, and it's because the changes that we made really impacted the entire budget. There was not one area that we said we cut a program or anything like that. The other one that was on that page then is postponing of any curriculum adoption, which was almost $1 million that was originally budgeted. So that was health and science will be postponed, which saved about $1 million in staffing.
How long does the state allow us to how long can we postpone? Is there a time limit?
I don't know if there's a specific time limit.
Okay.
I think that there's districts that have put this off for a couple of years in a row. I think it's always something to look at. And maybe next year it's one of those and not both, or I'm not real sure, but building that plan of what it will look like moving forward.
Okay. And I understand best practice is to not postpone it for an extended amount of time. I was just curious if there's any guidelines from the state.
I do have a couple questions. I noticed that 22-23 looked a lot similar budget number wise. So I kind of was comparing against that number just to see how we were kind of fitting into this reduced budget. I am curious, what is Board of Education Services?
That's the board.
Okay.
That's also where a lot of legal fees are paid out of. So
Okay.
you're going to see some variance in there.
Okay. Transportation, thank you for pointing that one out.
And that's function 255. I think that.
One.
Yep.
So on 2552, vehicle operation service. What is that?
That is the contract for your transportation services. That's all the buses and people that drive your buses. They're not actual district employees. You contract for those services. So that's the contracted is separate from the district employees.
Okay. And we basically found $1 million difference since you got on that we needed to from the original proposed till this. Sorry, page 14, very top, total function 2552 vehicle operations service.
Yes, the district had a meeting with First Student. We reviewed the contract. That is as close as we can get, but that is what it looks like based on the rates of increasing. That's where it should be. You can see that the 23-24 adopted budget was 4.1. And so the initial 24-25 budget was decreased and it should have been increased.
Thank you.
So one of the recommendations from the Budget Committee was for staff to work with the transportation contractor to lower services or, you know, the cost of the contract. Are there any possible reductions coming through for 24-25 transportation contract costs?
We met with the first student last week, and as we were going through and reviewing the contract, that's when we discovered the difference between what was proposed as opposed to what the actual contract is written. So we caught that. There's some discussions around some potential shifts and changes. We didn't actually have a hard number calculated out where it would be 10,000, 100 of $1 million as far as the savings, but it was more of a discussion around where can we do some cuts again to reduce the overall cost at this time, but there's nothing concrete.
Thank you. I appreciate the efforts.
Can I clarify to make sure I have it correct in my mind? So what was proposed wasn't actually what the contract was written for. So that was off?
You're correct.
Okay, thank you.
So hi Scott, I have some questions on transportation since we're talking about it. So with the contract, right now we have middle and high school starting at the same time. Is that increasing our transportation costs because you have to have more routes running concurrently or not? And also with elementary school, like my own children are experiencing this all year where there's 10 or less kids on a bus and we have more routes than we've had previously. So is that something where like we're reviewing those routes next year to kind of optimize them a little bit better?
I'm gonna pause. It is a delightful question, but I'm gonna go back to that idea of what our goal is tonight. And that is definitely a parking lot question for the Finance Committee and the Inquiry Committee. So somewhere I have note cards and I'll pass you a note card because I still have one from last week. And let's go ahead and look at that in the parking lot section so we don't get bogged down in the weeds tonight.
Yes, we are looking at that.
So I do have a question, since we're talking about just categories and stuff. You mentioned earlier about substitutes. What category is that in so we can see, so we understand what that is?
They're in the 300 purchase service areas.
300.
So you pay substitutes based on where the teacher or classified person is funded. So if they're in elementary, you're gonna have 1111 300. If they're high school, they're gonna have 1131 in a 300. If they're special ed, you're gonna have them in 1250 with a 300. So the
Gotcha.
substitutes go wherever the teacher is funded at. So you don't have just a budget line for substitutes for all district.
Okay. I do have a couple other questions. I don't know if it's gonna be pointed to you or maybe Scott since he understands it. Well, at least the titles. So I'm confused, and again, I think hopefully it's just transparency of we're all on the same page, us and the public. What is function 1122 middle school? I think that's extracurricular. You can tell by how.
Those are middle school clubs and activities.
Okay. So again, it's just more of a definition thing, not a, I'm asking or criticizing. Sorry, I have a couple more here. Resource rooms, function 1250. I know somebody explained this to me several months ago and I completely forgot about it. Well, we're showing 60 staff in that and I'm just confused, so.
That is the main area where special education is.
Okay.
And I did not go through and rename all of these, but
It's fine, so.
Yep.
Perfect, that's all I need to know.
That will include your resource room, licensed teachers, and any of your assistants in that area.
Yeah, one.
You good?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious, we have reductions of approximately 60. Looking at major function 1000 on page 7. We had the original proposed FTE was 336.25. And now we're at 265.43, which is 265, what?
55. Difference?
The major function 1,000.
The difference is 55. Sorry.
There was also, so the other difference, if you look at all the FTE, it's not going to be exactly 60. There were errors in the system where supplemental positions, so whether coaches or some of our student workers had FTE assigned to them. So I zeroed the FTE because those are not FTE, but they were not. So it looks like a reduction, some of those areas, reduction in FTE, and they're not necessarily a reduction in FTE. So if you add them all up, it's probably going to look like it's more than 60 because of that. So
they got moved to a different,
well, no, they're not FTE. So we think of FTE
Yeah.
as a position that works all year long, not, I'm a coach, a coach doesn't have a FTE. Yeah, because they're just a couple hours for a short time, few months. They don't add up. They're just a supplemental position. And so those were FTE. So there's some, that's why I said that.
Do you know how many that were categorized as FTE? Okay.
I found them in multiple areas throughout.
so I mean, to some degree though, there would have been 0.05 FTE. There would have been, if they're getting paid, they're somewhat of a full-time employee, what percentage of that? No,
Districts don't code like the extracurricular things that staff do. So if they are also a club advisor, so for example, what do you guys have? Like a FFA, forestry, there's some things that they get paid extra for. You don't get extra FTE for that.
Yeah.
So there is no FTE associated with those. Coaches are the same way. They're treated as an extra.
but in the original proposed, there were
There
those,
were some categories that had FTE in them that should not have had FTE.
thank you.
They're more generally like in the stipend category for a lot of those. Hence why they don't count as an FTE.
I'm just trying to make sure that I'm understanding why it was higher before and,
Yep.
okay, seems like an issue that should not be in there.
But if there is a stipend somewhere, it is,
The stipend is still budgeted in the salaries or benefits, salaries and benefits, all of that information is correct.
Okay.
But the actual
FTE
FTE
numbers. Just
count was a little bit off. And so
Okay.
we just made those corrections as we went through.
awesome. Thank you.
I have a question about the FTE piece. Are the students in Tiger Manufacturing, is the school district just doing the pass-through payroll for that? Or are they listed somewhere?
Pass through, I'm told.
I guess that brings up, oh, sorry.
I'm going to pause on the student workers conversation because that is a parking lot issue that is extremely important, needs our full attention during the inquiry process. Who would like a card for that?
Are there other questions on the general fund?
We do have one person online we need to check in with, yes.
Hi, thanks, Claire. Can you guys hear me? It's Melissa.
Yes, hi, Melissa.
Hi. I did have a few other questions, some of which have been answered while, from other questions that have been asked. But I'm wondering, I just want to clarify that when we've talked about the positions that are being removed from under instruction under the 1,000 as well as support services on the 2,000, have any positions, have any teachers been asked to leave for next year?
So thanks for the question. It's Kat. I'm actually going to pause on that because what we're really looking at is our goal of the budget of passing the budget tonight. And that's more of an HR and a board question. when it comes after we have passed it and the budget's been approved, and then they go through that process of making the reductions.
Okay, all right, I'll keep moving then. On page 4 of the budget under function 1132, this is somewhat in line with what we were talking about with coaching and people not being FTE, but those positions still being within salaries. So maybe my initial question of seeing how the FTE has decreased by 0.5 is not an issue, but there is a decrease in the budget of, well, maybe like $70,000, $60,000. So is that where is the 1132 where coaching for high school sports is taken into account?
Yes.
If there's not staff in that, like why is there even a staffing number FTE in there of 1.83 or 1.71 or 1.38? Why is that there?
1132 covers multiple things, all extracurricular. It doesn't cover just coaching. And there is a reduction in FTE in that budget.
But what? Okay, well, all right. Next one. So on page 14, under the 2574 printing and publishing, there had been a pretty like $73,000 budget. It had gone over to $95,550 during the current fiscal year, and now that's down to $1,000 proposed. Where is that going? Like, is it covered somewhere else?
That was not a change that I remember right now. I would have to get back to you on that.
What was the line item on that?
It's on
That's on page 14, 2574.
Thank you.
All right. On page 10, under 2230 assessment and testing, that is decreased by 1 FTE. I'm hoping that was moved somewhere else, since it doesn't seem like we could just not do testing requirements.
So again, that's a more specific staffing question. What I do know is that the district does have requirements from the state in regards to testing and training for testing, and that they make sure that they have the staffing in place to be able to make those requirements, or they should have the staffing in place to make those requirements.
Okay. Someone had already asked about 2310, so that does include legal fees, page 11. I did have one, and I mean, I guess this is a staffing issue, but it's page 12, function 2542 for care and upkeep of building, and then also function 2544 maintenance. There's an overall reduction of 6.25 FTE, but my overall question is like, what can we expect for the maintenance and care of our school buildings based on those reductions? That it stood out as, you know, fairly, because that had been going over budget this year as well, above what had been projected, and then it's going lower than it has been over the last few years.
I'm going to say that staffing reductions were made in every single area of the budget.
Okay. Last question, page 29 under function, it's fund 204, function 1132. Under high school extracurricular supplies and materials, there is a 1.57 million expenditure being shown, and I'm just curious what that is.
Those are student body funds, and so those are dollars raised by clubs, activities, sports, and that gives them the budget authority to spend the money that they raise.
All right, just an in and out. Okay, That is the end of my questions. Thank you.
I just have one more follow-up. That total FTE number, I wasn't even quite down to the total fund 100. Because I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, because it's 90 less overall between the original proposed and this, from 400, this is sorry, on page 16, the very bottom, the end of the general fund page. Was proposed originally was 482.77 FTE. This is proposed at 391.91 FTE difference. So
can I clarify on that one a little bit? So if you actually look at the true 2023-24, this year FTE is 466. And then for the proposed number 3, it's 391. That 482.77, that original proposal that we had in budget number 1 had increase of staff. So that's why you're going to see some of the difference. So instead of how we've had to do reductions, the original budget proposed to us had an increase in staff.
okay, so I guess that's a good question, clarifier then. I thought we were talking still about the differences we'd see between the original proposed and this. Is that not what the 60 FTE reduction on that slide is saying?
There are approximately 60
Yeah.
FTE reductions. Some of the ones out of the general fund were moved to special revenue funds, so
Okay.
it wasn't a reduction. Some of them changed. There was also FTE in places that didn't have FTE, so it was
Okay.
kind of fake FTE. So I made a list of all of the positions and added up the FTE. The other changes where we found things, I did not record what all of those were.
Perfect, thank you.
So the number that we have here, that takes into account okay, there, sorry. So this number takes into account the changes that were made to kind of move positions that were contracted into actual FTE.
Correct.
Okay.
This might be a dumb question, but it's been asked of me, so I'm not seeing in the budget anywhere where we would be cutting a school. I just want to clarify that that is not in your budget that you provided us, correct?
I did not include that in this budget proposal because that is much more complicated. And so that is and that if you did something like that, that would again change the number of staff and other things. So this is a budget that just gives you the authority to spend the money. The details will have to be worked out by the board.
Thank you.
And I would say that there's no dumb question. It was a great question.
Follow up kind of on this whole topic, right? You said there's reductions almost everywhere, but there's one I have not seen is, and I saw it earlier and I'm gonna lose where I had it, is essentially technology. There's no reductions there, but every other category there is. Is there a reason why technology was not impacted? I'm not trying to call it technology. I'm just trying to say that everywhere else has one, but they don't.
2664 is also technology, part of technology, I believe. And there was a 0.88 reduction there on page 15.
You know, we went from 0.8 to 0.
There's 2 function numbers for technology, 2662 and 2664. Well,
Thank you. That's
2662 stayed the same, 2664 had a reduction.
Gotcha. Okay.
Can you explain what the difference is between those two? Sorry, for the 2662 technology services versus 2664 DP operation services.
I think districts use some of these functions a little bit differently. And so while there's I am not 100% sure for Newburgh on what that position or what that function is categorized as.
Maybe our staff can help us with this.
Scott, can you define it for us, please?
It hasn't been explained to me either, Kim, so that was an
Well,
excellent
when I
question.
used to work here, it was one was someone that worked with the student information system. And the other are the technology folks that work out in the schools and throughout the district, keeping file servers running. So 2662 is all the technology support for keeping a network and all the devices running. And then 2664 was more someone that was supporting staff that were using a large student information system. That was historically what it had been in this district. I don't know if that's still the case, but that was the distinction. And they reported to two different departments.
I think a great parking lot question would to get better definition on that, since we have had that as a position in the past with a salary attached, but we're unsure of it.
Are there other questions on the general fund? You've been through the majority of the budget. We're just going to hit a couple of quick highlights in the special revenue funds, if you'd like to move on.
I do have kind of a general question on here when it comes to like salaries and associated payroll costs. I'm seeing, like the shift with FTEs and amount on salaries, but then it doesn't necessarily correlate with the associated payroll costs. Is there something that's driving that like recalculation?
So the unemployment I increased, so that was a major increase in the budget. So on a line item that may not have had anything else change, the associated payroll cost increased, even though the salary and the FTE may have stayed exactly the same. You guys ready to go to special revenues? All righty. I'm glad I'm not the only one that's having tech issues. All right. So your special revenue funds, the original proposed budget was just over $15 million. The new budget is 14.1 of a difference of $894,000. The changes, if you'd like to go to the next one, that I'd like to highlight is we went through and reviewed. This is part of the process with a revised budget, is I got to make some updates based on information we know now that may not have been known at the time that the original budget was developed. So it wasn't that anything was wrong. There was just new information out. And so budgets were adjusted to make sure that they are reflecting the current estimates from the state. So in 201, we aligned the federal grants with ODE estimates that were released. Fund 202, this is where the rent income has been recorded. This is a change that I made in 23-24. We actually transferred $300,000 as the plan. The district will have to, the board will have to do a supplemental budget, which will be coming to you at the same time you do your adopted budget, because we increased the transfers into the general fund, and that additional $300,000 that we transferred this year is helping reduce your negative ending fund balance. In Fund 251, with your SIA, adjustments were made to some other expenditures, and when possible, FTE from the general fund was also moved to this account. There were also some that were moved FTE into some of the 201 funds as well, that it covers all of the federal grants. Same thing with Fund 260. We align the state grants with ODE estimates based on what is known at this point. And then the change in Fund 299 is the FTE move that we did of 0.7 from the food service fund back to the general fund. I did not provide updates on the debt service or capital projects. There were a few minor changes made, but this is the summary of the major changes that have happened in your budget to reflect the information that is known at this time.
May I ask a question about the debt service fund? You have confirmed with our payment schedule that we have the appropriate budget.
Yep.
Thank
I have
you.
all the debt service payment schedules and we reviewed all of those.
Thank you.
Question, as relates to the last section of general plus all these special. You said that you moved some FTE out, which lower than general, but moved them over into some of these other ones like SIA. Do you have a list of like what you added or moved over to SIA? Recovered? And it may be, if you don't have it tonight, that's fine, but maybe share it with us or via email.
I'm going to say that I've provided that information to the district. The district is going to have to make decisions because there was other things within those grants that they would have to do. So these are where those decisions are made. I'm not going to be sharing that list of FTE that I reduced. I'm sorry.
But can you, this would, I think, help. Please outline what FTE can be held within SIA. So there are specific guidelines of how to use SIA and the funds to use SIA, or what FTE can be used with SIA. So can you give that general description?
Yes, so SIA funds can be used for a number of things. Part of it is it varies depending on every district because you had to have some community involvement and plans on how those funds were going to be used. The area that I focused on was special education. So when possible, there were staff that were moved out of the general fund into the SIA in the special education area. There were areas that I decreased were supplies, textbooks, things like that, similar to what I did in the general fund. It really is those areas that support the general fund for populations that may not be getting 100% support in the general fund.
I would equate it to the original budget on our title, where a portion of administration was for elementary schools was coming out of that, because you can use some title funds if they're in the school improvement plan to help student progress through behavior or academic. I'm not saying that's how we're still doing it, but that's equating it that way.
So overarching the SIA fund or the student investment account is those funds are primarily for traditionally underserved students within any given school district. That comes from the state. And then when it breaks down to the local level, we have our teaching and learning director who's been with us multiple times, and she will present what that is. And so specifically, how is that tailored for Newburgh Dundee Public Schools and how it directly relates to the staff and to the students. And so that would then, based on what we've submitted to ODE, is how we would do these shifts.
Okay, thank you.
Jackie, I have a question on page 19 with Fund 201. With the function 1111, primary K through 5. I'm seeing supplies and materials, that number's changed significantly. Is that something that you moved from the general fund into Fund 201?
So there is, within your federal funds, there is budget authority there to say, okay, so if we missed on the exact revenue coming in from Title 1A, how would we do that? So there's about a $340,000 difference. I budgeted that extra on one line item. So that money would be reallocated to a grant because it always has to be balanced back to what is actually received. And again, we receive estimates, and so we don't always know that. So there is some budget authority built in there. That is where the budget authority is. It is not, it isn't real money to just go out and spend $340,000 on supplies.
So but for the originally proposed budget, was because when I was looking in the general fund, the supplies for the K through 5, that number changed. But is that something that it shifted from one spot to the other?
No, so I went through in your 201 funds. Within Fund 201, there are 8 different grants that are budgeted in there. And so we don't always know exactly what we're receiving. So I used a fake revenue account and a fake budget account, which ended up being that supplies and materials of $340,000 to give the district budget authority to say, if our Title I grant comes in higher than they originally projected, we have the budget authority to spend that money because it would come out of that and be put into the 201 budget. Or the Title I budget, sorry.
On Fund 201 federal grants, I think I know why, but is there a reason why our revenue dropped 3 million?
Within your federal grants, I didn't look at all the history. If I had to make a guess, your ESSER funds were in there, and that was money that you had spent in there previously.
That's what I assumed, but I was double checking to make sure.
So I was asked to clarify the 340,000 a little further. So it's a common practice for a school district to build in a little buffer in the federal grants. We have to make a budget in the spring. We don't get our final numbers until later after school starts. So this is just a way for us to be able to have that authority to receive more grant funding. So right now it's sitting in a revenue line that it's just a holding place. And then the expenditure is also in just a holding place. Those two pieces balance each other. And it gives us the capacity that we would need if our grant funding is increased from what we have as initial amounts from the state and federal sources. Okay. Did that help? Okay.
On the last page in your document, I did a budget summary, but I did it based on appropriation level, and so I didn't include the unappropriated amounts. In order to get to the 98 million, which is your total budget, the unappropriated amount in the special revenue fund would have to be increased by $679,000. And in the 400, the facilities, that also has an unappropriated amount that I did not list in there. So if you add those numbers up, it doesn't add up to the $98 million. It is corrected on another page. It just had already been printed.
So that was page 72 of the budget document.
Correct.
Thank you.
I just have one general question as you're working through this. First of all, thank you for taking your time, working through this, trying to explain this to some of us, specifically me. I know there's questions about RIFs and potential, whatever. The future is the future. We need to approve the budget. But apparently there was some communication of prior RIFs done. Was that accounted for in this at all from what was communicated by Dr. Phillips? So he said there was 10, K-5 elementary, positions eliminated or reduced already. That was from prior to this.
So I believe it was a Thursday night where he came in and he had shared with you some potential RIFs in next round. Because the board hasn't shared with the licensed association of RIFs, we haven't moved forward. We did do an initial handful of, say, 4 or 5 individuals. With the license side, I've met with the association leadership a couple of times now, and so we have a draft ready to go should the board decide to inform the association that there's going to be a financial shortfall and we need to move in that direction. So we've got, in fact, I just had a meeting this afternoon to give you a little more clarity on that with the leadership. And so we've had those discussions. We can move in other areas such as in administration or confidential or in the classified ranks. And so some of that has taken place.
Appreciate the update. This is there were, as far as I understand, and I'm not trying to get too into details here, but there was two sets of RIFs. One that's kind of based on the budget that will be adopted and moving forward. But there was initial one that were 10 elementary school positions were notified as soon as, like, basically when Heather made the announcement that we have this problem, there was initial RIFs done at that moment.
Right.
Have those already been accounted for in some of these numbers that Jackie has brought forward
I
here?
would say yes. I would say originally that that original set, yes, but nothing after that has been added to the budget.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. And I'll give you an update on that as well, because I do want to double check that.
I want to speak to this because I think it's a common question. It's been asked 3 or 4 times by different members. So my understanding is we have an expert, Jackie Olson, that has come in. She has taken reductions throughout the budget to balance the budget because we have a very tight time frame and must have a budget approved by us and adopted by the board and published in the newspaper in between, right? By June 30th. So we don't really have time to identify all the individual line items by June 30th to meet this requirement for appropriations to be made, which allow us to spend money and continue to operate on July 1st. Okay, so while this budget document is not specific to everything that's going to happen, it is taking reductions throughout. I've heard her say a couple of times, all areas in the budget, in general fund in particular. And so we still have to go through the staff and the superintendent and his leadership team, involving the board, the community. They need to do some kind of modified process because it'll need to be brief because we only have a short time frame to give people notice because we know we have to make these reductions. So there's a whole staffing process that needs to happen. There's a negotiation process that has to happen with unions. So we can't say, if there's right now we've built in furlough days throughout the budget and we have built-in reductions in positions. Those are holding reductions because of the tight time frame we have. And so we will have to continue to, so the budget committee after tonight will be done with our work because we hope to approve tonight so we can meet that June 30th deadline. But the board will be coming back and doing an adoption of the budget on June. Anyway, thank you. So that will be our final set of actions that we need to do. We'll have a budget hearing where we can have more public testimony at that same time. But so just saying whether something is in or not in this budget is not really the reality of what Jackie has done to balance the budget versus what we need to continue to do through June and July. Hopefully by the end of July, we've asked that a reduction list get presented to the board and the budget committee, even though it's past our time to meet, even if it's just sent to us an email by August 31st. We recommended that to the staff. So in all reality, we won't know the answer to all the specifics until they go through that process, and it is not a quick process. It's something that you have to be very methodical and thoughtful in working with your union leadership as you look at a reduction in force. So I just wanted to be clear that Jackie has done exactly what we asked her to do, to give us a budget that is in line with the revenue that we're actually receiving, because what we had received from staff was $12 million more than we were going to receive. So I, as a vice chair of the budget committee, feel comfortable approving this budget tonight because we've gone through, we understand how the revenue's coming in, and we've reduced expenditures across the board to create a balanced budget. The hard work is still going to be done. So I hope that helps people understand what we can do tonight and what questions we can answer tonight and what will have to be put forward. And we're asking the board to establish a finance committee to continue working with staff as we continue into the new year. Any questions about, I just said a lot, so I'll pause for a minute.
Yeah, I'd like to say, I would hope that any questions I've had are not pointed towards you. Thank you so much for everything you've been doing. I very much appreciate it. I think there is a certain level of, there hasn't been a lot of time to ask questions, and I think we can all respect that, and I appreciate the idea of these parking lot questions, but there is still the, we only have limited time to be in a public meeting and ask questions, and so I think that's part of what's going on, is I want to make sure that we pointed this out, and we don't need an answer right now on exactly that five staff that may or may not, but I think that it's important, and definitely not directed at Jackie, but just that we say those things, because I think that people are wanting to hear them, and it's hard when we don't have time to ask these questions in other forums. So I appreciate keeping us on track, because it could definitely go off the rails very quickly, but I don't know for Jeremy, but for me, there's just certain things where I see this, I want to make sure this is known so that hopefully it can be addressed in the future place and
Yeah.
time.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Ask the questions. I think it's really important that you to be able to ask the questions. And if we can't answer them tonight, I really do want you to know I am writing them down. I am keeping them because they do need to be answered in the next step of the process. So please don't feel like you can't ask them. I want you to ask them. And I might have to gently say, here's a note card.
And speaking of note cards, in full transparency, I just wanted to add that as the board considers inquiry topics, I think it's really important with the proposal to postpone the curriculum adoption to get an idea of what other curriculum adoptions are on the horizon or what may have already been postponed, so that we don't end up with a lot of things happening at one time. As been through that before, and it's better to not have them all stack up.
So I want to clarify your parking lot question. Has there been other curriculum that has been postponed before we postpone this curriculum? So that we have a good understanding and idea what has been postponed or paused, and is it still?
I just have one other question on general fund. There is a line item for nursing services. But it doesn't have FTE associated with it, I think, in general. I'm trying to get back to it now. I'm just seeing if there's any other place that would be shown. I had someone ask me, they said that it looked like nursing services had been zeroed out, and that was a worry.
Page 8.
There is a spot where we have a 1 FTE.
So I'm going to jump on that question too, because and again, this is maybe kind of jumping on what Saul's going to ask. I understand we have 2 nurses, so what are the 2 nurses' budgets even from this current year? And then maybe that's a parking lot question. I don't know, but I'm just like, I don't see 2 nurses, and I know there's 2 nurses. There's 2 nurses on our website, so.
I do think that there is clarification on that, because I know that, but I'm gonna punt that to Mr. Lindenberg for that.
So yeah, I think you're getting a little close in the weeds here if you're talking about 2 FTE, which is also 2 individuals. But what I can tell you from a funding perspective, 1 is FTE is funded through the district, and 1 has been an agency employee. And so I hate to make that distinction, but question was asked, so I hope that gave you the clarity you're looking for.
That helps.
Okay.
Jackie, I do have a question on like prior stuff, because on this budget, we do see the actuals from like 21, 22, 22, 23. And, that's a great reference when we're looking at where we're at today. One thing that I'm kind of seeing on there is that there's spots where maybe the unappropriated ending fund balance is like at 0. In other spots, like previous years, it's not at 0. And then other times there's like $1.80. Can you kind of help me understand why we're looking at such big swings on actuals?
So on your unappropriated ending fund balances, remember the 21-22 and 22-23 is what was actually spent. So there should be 0 in those dollars because we didn't spend those dollars. So they're saved and they go into next year's budget. What you're seeing in those columns, like if I look at page 16 in the general fund, the unappropriated ending fund balance there, that second line from the bottom, it shows 0 in 21-22, 0 in 22-23, 23-24 is adopted. So you see an adopted amount of $2.8 million. And then the initial proposed this year of 3.037, and then the new proposed of 0. So the budgeted amounts you'll see for unappropriated, you should never see a dollar amount in there for actuals. Is there one on there?
Well, for a beginning fund balance, then there's some that are kind of inconsistent where it's like one year you have a number and then the next year it's 0, and then it's kind of jumping all over the place. I don't know if that's just like a kind of
It really depends
style.
on the grant, because the unappropriated, you don't have that in every fund. It's very specific if you have that. And so sometimes you have contingency, sometimes grants have carryovers that are not budgeted as a beginning fund balance because you don't receive that revenue that year. You receive it as revenue the following year. So it's budgeted as an actual, like if it's a state grant of 3,000 or a federal grant of 4,000, it's not a beginning fund balance. So it really depends on the grant, and they do vary every single year.
Do you know if we took care of the potential issue of FTE in the grant fund? Or if that was an issue, or if it actually wasn't? We talked about it at the first budget committee meeting.
Are you meaning the transportation grant and the nutrition grant?
No, I believe it was bond, sorry.
It was the bond.
Oh. Yes, so in the original meeting within the bond money, there were some FTE that were allocated, which was not within law. So I don't know how that shift occurred.
So I think you're thinking of CET.
It was I believe a janitor cost, and I wanted to check if we cleared that up, that it was good, or if that got shifted to make sure that that is.
Custodians for is operations and should not be included in capital projects for a bond fund. So we should not be.
Right,
Yes.
they were budgeted in there, and he's wondering if those are just gone or if they've been shifted. Does that make sense?
Yep, I made minor changes. I was not at that budget meeting, so I don't have that history. So I would say that there's budget authority there. Other decisions still may have to be made after this meeting.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that would you say that based on you going through that part of the budget that we are in compliance with dutifully spending bond money?
I did not look at it in that detail.
Fair.
I'm going to be completely
Yeah.
honest.
Thank you. That's, yeah.
And that makes sense because you were focusing on our budget and not bond.
Correct. I was giving you the budget authority. How it's spent after I'm done
Yeah.
is up to the district.
But I do think that's a good question to come back to of, is that still within the bond finance plans? To make sure that, that is accurately changed to be
Because-
within law.
Because I was still looking for the line items. I'm on page 69, function 4150, building acquisition, construction and improvement. In the proposed 3-column, $223,556 for 3.25 FTE. Is that where you're asking if that is custodial?
I do not remember what line it was. I just remember that we had a conversation about
Okay.
whether the bond money was, or that was being used appropriately. And I figured this is. as
So
good
the
a time.
4150 means it has to be on a capital improvement project. Someone that's fixing the plumbing in a sink or a toilet in the bathroom should not be charged there. But someone that is, let's say they're painting a whole school to get, so there's no more lead paint, right? That would be more bond related. So there is a whole list of projects for bond related, but it's not meant for operational custodial. But I love your parking lot question to see if that is still where those, what those positions are being used for.
If there aren't any more questions, minute break. We're gonna go ahead and just take a 5-minute break and come back. And when we come back, we will go over questions 1 through 3 and 13 of what the budget committee needed, and we will provide what we have received in response to those needs. And then we'll go to our motions. We will be back, don't trust that clock, at 8:02. All right, so it seems, although I could be corrected, that we have asked questions. Are there any more questions before we move on to the next section? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the next section. And in that, we're gonna go ahead and review the first 4 questions that we had from what the budget committee needs in order to approve this budget. And then question 13. Hey, it works now. Boom. Oh, it stopped. Sorry, I'm much faster than him. I didn't mean it that way. I'm going too fast. Nope, now it's not working again. I know. Let me try it again. There we go. Oh, there we go. Okay, so our first one was the beginning fund balance. I'm just going to go through these really quick. Please let me know if you have a question. But we said that we needed it to be projected, the ending fund balance determined by Jackie, which it has been determined, with the latest information that was received as of May 20th, 2024. And that the beginning fund balance would be 0. And as we saw today within the budget, the beginning fund balance is at 0 as of today. Are there any questions in regards to that one?
I have, I guess, one question. Not, I'm ready to prove this, but like, if we don't adjust to 0, then does that mean we have to come back and adjust for what we're still negative? Say July, August, whatever that's gonna be. Okay, just need to know. Thank you.
Yep, it's just putting off the inevitable. And you do have to have a balanced budget when you put it forth towards the state, correct? Okay. The second one was in regards to state school funds, local revenue, transportation cost, and daily membership that is weighted, so the ADMW. What we had said is that we need the components in the budget to be based on Oregon Department of Education estimates instead of projections by staff that we have used in the past. We also said that local revenue of those property taxes, common school fund, and county school fund. We said the transportation cost will reflect the estimate cost for the 2024-25 plus the additional reimbursement due for the overspend in 23-24 that will be paid in May 2025. And we recognize that our reimbursement rate is at 70%. And then we also said with our ADMW that we're going to use the projection used to project state school funds will be from the ODE reported extended ADMW rather than staff projections, so that this can align with our lower enrollment trends for the past 3 years. So in the budget, we looked at and we talked about how our ADMW has been adjusted. We are going by what is ODE's estimate for our state school funding and revenue. Any other questions on question number 2? And our needs of approval being met in regards to that.
So with the transportation costs, that is not in this budget, that projection of getting that reimbursement, or is it?
I did not budget the projected amount for transportation only for the May 25 adjustment.
And that's partly because it's in May and it's an estimate right now, or okay.
We don't have all of actual data for this year. So we have to have all of the actual data. The state has to reconcile the entire state school fund. And there is a chance that it could swing in the opposite direction. And so I chose not to budget that amount. And if it comes in positive, it just increases your overall revenue next year, which might increase your fund balance a little bit. But it's hard to budget that amount and spend it if you're not going to get it.
That's a smart way to look at it, actually. Thank you, Jackie.
Any other questions about item 2? Okay. For 3, we asked for a summary of changes from the proposed to the draft approved budget. And we have that in that additional column. Thank you. That was made it really easy to navigate through that. Along with a summary of the major changes, including the changes by major object for revenue and major function level for expenditure. So she presented that today in regards to the higher level changes. Questions? Needs? Okay. And then as we talked about earlier, the short-term loan debt services, a loan is not needed at this time due to our cash flow projections. Okay. And then I'm looking at, actually, if we could go to slide 18, please. Nutritional services. Thank you. It's okay. Great. Oh, thank you. And then our final one of a need in order for approval of the budget was the nutrition services recommendation to remove the cabinet level positions and expenses from the nutritional services, which we saw that was put back into the general fund. And then to increase food budgets in nutrition services to support the community eligibility program, the CEP, which allows all students to receive free meals. So I know we saw the first portion, the second half. I don't think we did an increase in nutrition food budget. So I'm not saying.
I don't remember off the top of my head. We can look real quick.
That would be great. Thank you.
So it's on page 52 and 53 of your documents. And in the 400 object code on page 53, it increased some there. That's some of your food costs. There's also some in 310 that increase there as well. So without knowing exactly where all of those expenses are going to hit, it gives this food service the authority to spend the money when it comes in.
Any questions, thoughts in regards to that?
Yeah. On Fund 299 revenues, 5,000, the other sources. What are the other sources?
So as part of running a school lunch program, you have to do a match, it is called. And so this has been done different in the district. The way I've seen it done most often is the way I budgeted. It is a transfer out of the general fund. So you have in the general fund, it shows an expense, and in here it shows as a revenue of that transfers the money in there to match. So you can prove to the state that you did that.
Thank you. Follow up. So, sorry. Originally it was proposed that 539,000. Was that original number not fully pulled out?
So I should say that the other sources include both the beginning fund balances and the transfers.
Okay.
When I looked at this fund, I do not anticipate the beginning fund balance being $539,000. And so I reduced it to better reflect what I'm seeing in the current fiscal year.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any questions in regards to our list of needs for approval before we move on? Okay, so we have several motions and we have an action item tonight. I'm going to go ahead and turn over the action item.
I just, on the agenda, there's one place for committee question and comments. And I know we've been questioning all along, but I do have one more comment I'd like to make if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Thank
You need
you.
a card?
Well, I'm not asking a question. But I'll take one if you think I need to use one.
I'm just giving you a hard time.
Yeah. So, I just want to mention I think it was a Thursday night board meeting, the board reviewed, Dr. Phillips talked about various possible reductions coming forward. And one of the things that was spoken about was real estate and using, property for future school sites, that if we possibly sold those items, then we could use those dollars operationally to get through a budget year. So one of the things I would say about that is that I think it's important that we distinguish between a one-time use of savings versus a permanent course correction to get us on track to the number of students we have. So for instance, if we sold one of the properties that the district has, and we had those funds available, best practice is to move that into capital projects to be used on future property needs, building needs. The issue is if you sold a piece of property and you say, okay, well, we will hold off on making those reductions this year and we're going to use that property money. It's like selling your house in order to get through the groceries and the school supply, whatever you need, clothing, gas for your car. It's not a very strong financial decision to use that money up for operations just to run the school district, because the next year you would still be you would have spent that money. You'd no longer have that asset that would help our district for our future growth as we continue to add houses to this community. And then that money would be gone and we'd still have to make those reductions in the following budget year. So I'm just saying, I'm making a comment that if that were being considered by staff as a solution for the budget, it's as a person that's been responsible for a large school district budgets, it's something that I would never recommend, to take a permanent resource and spend it down in a year to make it get through one budget year, that then the next year you would no longer have the piece of property and you still have to make that reduction because we didn't magically get all these students come in that 1 year. So I just wanted to make that statement so that it's clear that as a vice chair of the budget committee, that's not something that I would personally support. It's not something I'm saying this is from the budget committee. This is just something that I noted as I was listening to the superintendent and board discussion on possible budget reductions. Thank you for listening.
Sorry, the allergies are bad. I'm losing my voice. Just want to piggyback on that. I think I feel the same for the sale of a school. Kind of feels the same along with that. I know I was one of the ones that brought that up as an alternative to selling the school. But that feels like the same. I know in our May 7th meeting, budget committee, we talked about the possible eventuality of having to sell a school if the trend of declining enrollment. But I think that kind of goes along the same thing. I think that the sale of any school right now as a temporary fix is a very, very bad idea. And that's a discussion for long-term problems, long-term solutions at another time. So.
I would like to comment when it comes to, ending fund balances and when we have budgeted numbers. And throughout the year, we have to rely on you guys to be watching to make sure that we're not going above these numbers. Now, if we are coming below, great. I don't recommend that we just turn around the next year and dump all those funds back into spending. That, over time, this district has tried to build those ending funds, and, it's the same kind of idea as, I'm expecting that I'm going to get my refund check this year, so let's go, spend a bunch. And that refund check doesn't come in what we expected, and now times are tight. And I really don't want us to go back in that same spot. I think we're all kind of on the same page that, let's not repeat this. So that if there are, any funds that come in and we've got stuff left over, let's not plan on dumping that all into next year, because it's not going to put us in a good spot if we have a year where we don't have those ending funds. So I think that should be kind of put aside to start rebuilding that cushion.
Okay, I'll go with a comment. Well, I know that we have spoken a lot tonight about numbers and categories and actuals, revenues and expenditures. I do want to acknowledge that I feel every single one of us on this budget committee and board members understand that those actually represent people and families and students. And so while we go through tonight and we do talk about those numbers, it is not lost on us what they represent. So I want to acknowledge that. Okay. So we have an action item for tonight, and then we have two motions. I'm going to turn it over to Claire for our action item for tonight.
So we did hear from a community member, a former board chair, about the action on the unappropriated ending balance from general fund. And we did have in conversation in a previous budget committee meeting of restoring that fund balance over time, that we could do it. What the board has done is waived it for this current year. So we have the 2% from contingency. It's just 2.48 or something built into the budget. But what I'd like to see is a recommendation from the budget committee to help guide the board and staff on how to restore, just like you were just talking about, that unappropriated ending fund balance. Looking at the 25-26 year, having a target of 2.5% fund balance, and then getting that to 5% in the 26-27 budget. So that gives us 3 years to restore, going from a 0 fund balance back to that 7% that's required in the board policy for reserves, DBDB. So, so I would like us to consider that as a budget committee tonight. And I open that to questions for understanding or clarifications.
And I would like to clarify, it would be a recommendation by the budget committee. The board would have to be the one that would make action on it.
I think that it's necessary. I would also say that I think that the beauty of having you all here with lots of experience and that this budget committee doesn't turn over every year is to make sure that when that comes in next year and it's at 1%, that we, if we aren't, that you all are saying, no, we need to get that back up. Like this wasn't a forever goal to pause this unappropriated balance, because I think that everything that you said is correct, that we have to get that back up. This was a short-term fix, and to make that codified more or less is critical.
I'm going to go ahead then if there's not any other questions. I move the Budget Committee recommend that the board direct staff to restore the general fund unappropriated ending balance to 2.5% of total resources net of the beginning fund balance in the 25-26 budget and to 5% in the 26-27 budget. Phew, that is policy language. But note that I did leave out the word staff between direct and restore on the slide.
Is there a second for the motion?
I second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All right. All those in favor of the recommendation to present this to the board? Aye. Opposed?
The person online,
Thank you.
Aye, yes, thank you.
Thank you. Opposed? Abstaining. Motion passed. All right, we have two other motions tonight. And you do have a motion paper. Thank you. I appreciate it. The first motion is a motion for the budget. And the second motion is for taxes.
I have a. On reading this, do all those numbers need to be read or just the total?
I think just the total needs to be read.
I move that the Budget Committee of Newburgh Dundee Public Schools approve the proposed budget for the 2024-2025 fiscal year in the amount of $98,994,196.
I second.
There's been a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
All those opposed? Abstaining. Motion passes. Second motion. Second motion is to impose and categorize ad valorem taxes. Under there's two. Let's do the first I move, and then when that passes, we'll go to the second.
I move that the permanent tax rate of 4.6616 per 1,000 value be levied in support of the general fund.
I second it.
We have a motion and second. Any discussion?
Yeah, what is this?
So this,
Let me explain what this
Yeah.
is saying.
so we have to make a motion to approve the permanent tax rate, which is set for us. But we still have to make a motion to pass it to use that tax rate. So the tax rate is saying that it is $4, 6,616 10,000ths per $1,000 of assessed value on a house. Did I get that right? Oh, wow.
So this is where we're levying property taxes for the operations, the daily operations of our school district.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay. All those in favor of the motion? Aye. Opposed? Oh, sorry, Melissa.
Aye.
Thank you. Opposed? Abstaining. Motion passed. And our final motion.
I move to impose $6,816,600 for debt service for general obligation bonds, which for purposes of Article 11, Section 11B of the Oregon Constitution is excluded from the education rate limitation.
Can I clarify if that's section 1B rather than 11B?
My apologies.
It's okay. I just. Thank you.
Yes.
Can you
I'll restate.
amend that, please?
Okay, I will restate. So, I move to impose $6,816,600 for debt service for general obligation bonds, which for purposes of Article 11, Section 1(1)(b) of the Oregon Constitution is excluded from the education rate limitation.
I second that.
We have a motion and we have a second. Any discussion or clarification?
I would just clarify that this is imposing property taxes to pay the debt service or the amount we owe annually to our construction bonds that we've used to improve our physical buildings, and so that's our bond program.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining. Motion passes. Thank you very much for everyone's time, efforts, and due diligence. This meeting is adjourned at 8:30 and the Budget Committee is now finished. Thank you.